Hello, everybody. It's Miss Acreage, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about plot structure. Now, like figurative language and a lot of our other fictional elements that we'll be reviewing over this week, this should be review. You've probably learned a lot about this already in your middle school classes. I just want to make sure that we at least hit it a little bit, review it together so we're all on the same page. The plot is the main events of a story, all right? They are broadly organized into the beginning, middle, and end. But the plot structure is a little bit more specific. The plot structure is how specific events are arranged in the story. And we have different names for where the events are arranged. So we have exposition, conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Now, if you are looking at a chart, a plot chart, it will look a little something like this. Don't worry about the worksheet comment. That's for in class. It will look a little something like this. We call this like a carrot diagram, something like that. We're going to start with the exposition over here on the far left, and then we're going to move into the conflict, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and last but not least, the resolution. So we're going to take these one by one, and I'm going to look at this through Finding Nemo. Why Finding Nemo, Miss Acreage? Just because it's a pretty common movie that most of us have seen. It's a common text that we can talk about just to familiarize ourselves with the terms. So the exposition introduces the characters and the setting. So we get to know a little bit about our main characters and their sidekicks, and we also get to know where the story is going to take place. So the exposition in Finding Nemo is, of course, the very, very sad beginning where Marlin and his wife lose most of their eggs except for Nemo. Nemo also gets to go to school during the exposition. He meets Mr. Ray and all of his little school friends. The exposition, we know this is the exposition of Finding Nemo because we are introduced to the main character, Marlin and Nemo, and it introduces the setting of the ocean. After the exposition, we are introduced to the conflict. The conflict is the main problem or the main argument that is located in a story. Of course, in Finding Nemo, the conflict is when Nemo swims up to the boat and he is captured and taken away from his father. That jumpstarts the rest of the plot. There's three different types of conflict. There's man versus man. That's when two people are either in an argument or have a big decision to make. There is man versus nature, which think about movies like The Revenant or books like Into Thin Air. That's when people are up against forces of nature. And then there's man versus self. Think about Catcher in the Rye, where our main character Holden is having an internal dialogue about himself, his experiences, and his future. All right, after the conflict, we're going to move into rising action. Rising action are the moments that build up the conflict, maybe build up some suspense or tension, and they also help develop our characters. So in Finding Nemo, part of the rising action is when we meet Dory, of course, the forgetful fish. We also meet the vegetarian shark, Bruce. Dory meets her little squishy or all the little jellyfish that are bouncing around. We also meet the sea turtles. That's also part of the rising action. And the seagulls. That's part of the rising action too. Usually the rising action is going to be the biggest chunk of a story. After the rising action comes the climax. Now the climax is the highest, most exciting part of the story. Sometimes climax can be pretty hard to pick out. So if you need to think about it, when the conflict begins to shift, when the characters start solving their problems a little bit, that is where you're going to find the climax. Sorry about that. So in Finding Nemo, the climax is when Marlin shows up and finds Nemo what he thinks is dead. Oh, but we know he's not really dead. After the climax, we have the falling action. This is when the plot slows down and we're starting to move towards the resolution. Usually, there's not too much falling action in the story, so not too much falling action to pick out of Finding Nemo either. The only piece of falling action is when Marlin and Nemo are reunited, but Nemo and Dory are stuck in the tuna net and they have to work together to get out. That's part of the falling action. And last but not least is the resolution. Of course, this is the conclusion. Hopefully, it's a happy ending. It's when the conflict is resolved. Or is it? Now, when we don't quite resolve the conflict or we leave it a little bit more open-ended, maybe for a sequel or for another companion story, we'll call that a cliffhanger. And the fancy word for resolution, it's a French word that starts with a D, is denouement. Isn't that fancy? And that's it for plot structure. Like I said, this should be review, but just know that any fictional element that we've talked about so far is fair game on quizzes, tests, assignments. Thank you for tuning in to Miss Acreage Talk Time.